shouldn't let other people dictate how you write your story, but at the same time, you should also keep in mind who your audience is.
Yeah.
If I'm trying to write a story that I want to publish on Royal Road, yes, I've got a list of half a dozen topics that I'm just going to avoid. I feel okay making those compromises and not writing about those things because I know that it will cause pushback from my audience.
This is the Crit RPG Podcast, your one-stop shop for everything Lit RPG, progression fantasy, and Royal Road. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Crit RPG Podcast, the only podcast where the podcast host bullies someone into using their camera. With me today is EmergencyComplaints. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm not doing terrible. Thank you so much for asking. It's one of those
really
things
all
that the
you can
Americans
ask
do that
for.
they never really get. Right?
Found that if I'm honest about how I'm doing, people ask follow-up questions, so anybody asks, I'm good.
Yeah, stuff like, are you really sure? Or can you tell us where you were on Friday evening? I totally get that, yeah.
Where I was on Friday evening.
Questions?
Likely home, because home is where I'm always at, because I work from home
Do
now.
you... And that gives more follow-up questions like, do you have anyone who can verify that? Like, I totally get it. Totally get it.
Yeah, right. Follow-up questions. People get nosy. They want details.
And you have to talk to people. Like, who wants that? Like,
Exactly. I work from home for a reason.
Yeah, you write books.
Right.
Are you a full-time writer?
I am now. Didn't used to be, but today I am.
Wonders of the economy. But, okay, so you have 4 books, you said, like 4-book series, right?
Yes, kind of.
Okay. Which one do you want to talk about
first? If you go
first?
look at my profile, you'll see 4 books there. But one of them was just kind of like, I went on vacation, but writing is also my hobby. So when I was on vacation from my job writing, I wrote some more. And I happened to go on vacation right when they were doing a write-a-thon. So I'm like, I can knock out 60,000 words in a week. That's not, well, it was a bit more, but it ended up being like 2 or 3 weeks. But I just wrote like this little story that has no real audience on Royal Road at all. So that got like 200 followers and never went anywhere, which was fine because it was only 60,000 words. And I just did it for fun because write-a-thon and I was on vacation.
I mean,
but not counting that one, 3 stories.
I mean, I kind of did the same thing, right? I was like, hey, write-a-thon, that's great. So I just wrote something real quick and it had like 50 followers. And I'm good with that because if I had more, I would hit Rising Stars and then would have to write more, which I can't because I don't have time. So we're good.
Right. Yes. Then that's what that story was. It's a cute little story. It is not what Royal Road likes. I was not expecting it to be like a smash success or anything. But technically I wrote 4.
So what's it about?
So the story that I wrote for Write-a-thon is about a magic talking dog whose owner is a wizard who leaves for basically WizardCon to show off his potion that he made, except that he leaves the potion behind sitting on the counter. So she takes the potion and goes on a cross-country trip, homeward bound style, to bring it to him. Actually, no, I don't want to tell that part because that's spoiling it for anybody who actually wants to read it. That's the premise of the story. We won't talk about what happens when she gets there. You want to know, you got to read it and find out.
Awesome. I mean, that's just awesome, right? And it's really wholesome. And I kind of wonder why Robo doesn't like it. Are the numbers?
Well, for one, it's like 60,000 words long because that's Write-a-thon. And we know Royal Road likes longer stories. For another, it's basically like middle grade fiction. Nothing bad happens. It's a magic talking golden retriever and the interesting people she meets along the way. Her name is Lemon. The cover is just a golden retriever that, like, I think some AI program, Night Cafe, I think it was, I made it on. It's definitely not marketed to Royal Road. It's just there because I write on Royal Road.
Well, I thought it looked fantastic. So there's that.
I mean, the people who read it liked it. Just not very many people read it because it wasn't something that looked interesting to them, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, like, and also I'm the kind of guy who writes female MC sci-fi psychological thrillers. So But yeah,
No,
that's
I
pretty cool.
did. I did have one guy catch this. When I put the story up, I checked the attractive lead box for my golden retriever main character. One guy in my comments was like, that's a little suspicious.
I think it's awesome.
I thought it was a hilarious joke myself, but only one person ever noticed it.
No, wait, this is wrong. There we go. Yeah, cutting that out too.
Great. Well, while you're cutting it out, let me take another drink real quick.
Do it. No, I also cut. I do my drink breaks on camera, and I think that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, so, well, if not Lemon, which is objectively the best story, what do you want to talk about then? Which one?
I guess it depends. How far back do you want to go? Should I start at the beginning, or do you just want to talk about my most recent one?
Why don't we start talking about the time you moved to Bel Air?
Well, worked in Philadelphia, born and raised, playgrounds where I spent most of my days, and then the rest of it's copyrighted.
Okay. No, but actually, before we started the podcast, which is stuff that you can find in the bonus material on Patreon, link down below. You said that, well, you started writing because you were made redundant from your job.
So I used to be a mortgage underwriter, and as pretty much everybody who lives in the United States knows, that 2020 and 2021, mortgage industry went crazy. You know, COVID was happening. I'm not sure how that made houses more desirable, but it did. So mortgage companies hired tons of people, just tons and tons of them. I never even made it into the company. I went in for an interview, and then my first day, they were like, everybody's working from home now. Can you work from a computer? Should we send you one? And I'm like, yeah, I've got a computer. And then they decided to send one anyway. But yeah, for like 2 years, I worked in the mortgage industry. And then in 2022, everything shrank and the Fed started raising interest rates and the housing market got smaller and houses got more expensive and people couldn't afford them and nobody else was doing refinances because why would you refinance a house to 10% interest when you could get it for 3% a year ago? So me and several thousand of my coworkers found ourselves unemployed. But my company had this weird thing where they didn't want to say they'd ever laid anybody off. So my options were take like a 70% pay cut to go to some other department where I would then be churned out for, not having enough work to do, or take a 10-week severance. I'm like, I'll take 10 weeks of pay. And that gave me 10 weeks to find a new job. So I could put in a bunch of applications, or I could, take a stab at this thing I'd been doing as a hobby for over 20 years and start writing. So I started writing. And I did it just like my job. I got up at the same time. I sat down in front of my computer at the same time my shift would have normally started the week before. And I wrote for 8 hours. Then I did it the next day and the next day and the next day. And then I took a break for a week to try out the new WoW expansion. And then I went back to writing because the WoW expansion was no good. I don't know. Something about Shadowlands just didn't do it for me. So I got one character to max level and said, yeah, we're just going to unsub again. This was not.
That was Shadowlands? Yeah, same thing here, yeah.
Yeah, I tried it. I got one character to max level and I went, I don't want to do any of this. And I unsubscribed and went back to writing. So other than that 1 week off, I wrote 8 hours a day. And at the end of the month, I had about 100,000 words. And that was my first book, Ascendant. So I went and I put that up on Royal Road. And about 8 weeks after I was no longer employed, I'd made about $300 from my writing. And then next month I made another 1,000. And I said, well, that's not really enough to live on, but I've got money in the bank still, so let's keep trying. And then that was about the peak. $1,100, $1,200 for a month was about what I made. So I'm like, well, maybe I just didn't hit the market right on this one. I did all right. I did well enough to encourage me to keep trying. So I released my second story, which got more followers faster and less Patreon conversions. And I'm like, oh God, I've got to go back to work now. I can't live on $400 a month. It just doesn't work. And then Podium sent me a message on Royal Road one day asking if I'd be interested in publishing with them. So they got those 2 series, 3 books in each, so 6 books total. And the advances allowed me to keep writing from April 2023 up to today. Which was great because when they sent me that message, I was already putting in applications and going, oh no. I
Oh
don't want
no.
to do this. Don't make me go back to work. Can I just please keep writing?
1
So
second.
Podium saved me.
Dramatic lighting. Can you move the mouse again so we have like the white screen again so your face is lit?
Yes, that is my desktop 3 monitors we were talking about. That
Which is very good lighting.
yeah, they all just have Word documents pulled up on them. But every now and then it
Yeah.
goes to screensaver. Where do you want me to start over at on that?
No, I think we're good. It was a very dark time in the podcast, so it's okay.
Right.
All right.
So anyway,
So you.
dramatic lighting, the light comes back on.
Mhm,
I started writing Keiran about
mhm,
3/4 of the way through writing the God Machine.
mhm.
And I'm like, I don't know if people are going to like this one or not, but we're going to give it a go. And it
Mhm.
turned out people did like it.
Yeah.
So
What's it?
everything
Well,
I learned writing on the first two, I kind of
mhm.
applied and said, here's the things that, a big list of things Royal Road readers do not want to read about. And I didn't write about any of those things.
Oh man, that makes so much sense. Like I'm procrastinating right now. I've procrastinated the entire day today, but tomorrow I will, go back to rewriting. But what you're saying about learning more by finishing books makes complete sense. I've recently begun to think that maybe I'm making a mistake by rewriting the book for the second time, but I want to finish it. God damn it! So let's go. I'm doing it.
Right.
I'm doing it mostly for me because I am still learning a lot. But now the time is good for me to just put it out there and say like, hey, this is as good as it gets.
Right. I think on the subject of rewriting a book, it really depends on what your goals are.
Mm.
If you're trying to make as much money as possible, which I'm not, despite what some people
Mm.
in my comments have said, I'm just trying to make enough to pay my bills, which isn't even that much. It's like $15 an hour. I'm trying to make more than I would make working at McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not trying to make a bunch of money, rewriting is great. You can learn from your mistakes. You can say, here's what I did wrong. Here's,
Mm-hmm.
the feedback I got. If you're trying to, pay all of your bills on your writing and not have to put in applications and put on a hat and a name tag and make some money that way, then rewriting is not great because you've
Yeah.
already seen that story didn't do great and people aren't going to be too terribly willing to give it a second shot.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I don't think. See, I keep thinking that once because the start wasn't all that good, and people who got over the start loved it, but people who mostly said like, "Hey, look, the start isn't all that great." And I'm really going to see. I mean, I'm going to re-upload it on Railroad again and put some ads on and kind of see if the conversion rates changes. Because yeah, I kind of want to see if I can break my old record, have the conversion rate be even higher than before. Because if I do, then I could just keep going. Because I think I'm actually pretty okay now. But anyway, so right, you wrote Keiran. How high is it right now? Like, what's the follower count? Like, you can't look right now because Royal Road is down.
Down for maintenance.
Yep.
I don't need to look because I obsess over my stats and numbers. I have like a whole big Excel sheet where I'll show it to you at some point.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 300 lines long of me taking basically just timestamps of data and adding them.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that as of this morning, it was at 4,935 followers.
Which is great. It's really
Yes,
great.
that's really good.
Mm-hmm.
It's way more than I thought it would get.
Mm-hmm.
And Patreon is bringing in enough money that I'm like, I pay my mortgage, I pay my car payment. The electric company's getting some money this month. I might even buy groceries.
What? Oh my god! Like, slow down there.
I know.
What's next? Like, heating?
Man, I don't want to be greedy. I just throw on a sweater.
Yeah, that's fine.
But
Um.
yeah, I've kind of talked about money a lot, and I think that's mostly because I caught some random comment at the top of my dashboard the other day
Mm-hmm.
calling me a sellout. No, excuse me, not a comment. I got a review yesterday saying something like, I can't tell if this is AI or just a cheap cash grab, but Royal Road is a place for artists, not degenerates. Don't give this guy any money or something like that. Just the weirdest review, and I'm not even sure if I'm supposed to be insulted or just confused. But it kind of stuck in my head as a weird thing to say,
Mm-hmm.
because nobody goes into writing because they think they're going to make a ton of money on it.
Yeah,
I mean,
no.
it's not too hard to find a job making $15 an hour, and that's more money than you make writing for almost anybody.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like, I think, I think it was John Beers who encouraged people to only start writing full time once it was not losing you money. So,
That's pretty good advice, yeah.
yeah, that's pretty
But
good.
in my case, I was down to $0 a month income, so it was really easy to hit that hurdle.
Right? Yeah. No, I thought I can totally see it. Like, I'm still on the job hunt, but in the magical wonderland of Germany, you get really good unemployment benefits if you get fired. So,
Nice.
yeah, I'm okay until November, which is okay, and I'm going to find a place that actually where I can work at that's nice and where I don't feel as stressed out, so that I can actually write on the side. It's going to be fun.
Right.
But
Yeah, that's a plan.
it is a
Make
good
it
plan.
happen.
I was actually going to ask you to kind of talk more about Keiran, actually, right? So,
Sure.
what is it about for people who don't know it yet? And yeah, how did it come to be?
Okay, so basically, I'm going to back up a little bit before I talk about Keiran and talk about my first one that I posted on Royal Road Ascendant, which was about a guy who was pretty much top of the world in terms of raw power. And he goes from top of the world down to basically nothing and gets de-aged down to a child with no memories, and then has to, start working his way back up again, figure out who he was, who's after him. And I did some things right, and I did some things that, in hindsight, I would not have done. And I kind of wanted to revisit the base concept of a child with a ton of power. So there's a lot of similarities in, I don't want to say the opening chapters, but just the concept of my first book and Keiran, where Keiran starts with a man who is, again, at the very top of the world, peak of raw power, except that he's also really, really old. I don't know if you know a lot about getting old, but things start to hurt all the time, and there's not a lot you can do about that, as
I'm
I'm learning
34.
myself. Yeah, that's a thing that starts happening in your 30s, especially if you've put on a lot of weight from COVID. Uh, and you just, there's not a lot you can do about it. So here I've got a guy who is devoting the majority of his magic to extending his lifespan, keeping himself functioning, and he's just like, I can't do this anymore. I need a permanent solution. So he starts researching soul magic and the reincarnation cycle, and he says, I've got it. I'm going to give myself a new body. By that, I mean I'm just going to let the reincarnation do the work for me, give me a new body, but I want to keep all of my memories because I'm a badass super archmage, and, we don't want to lose that. I've been working 2,000 years at all my magic. So he figures out how to do that. And then chapter 1 starts, and it's him basically waking up in his new body, except that he's not a newborn. He's like 3, or I think it was 2. And he's going, okay, well, something has gone wrong because I should have had all my memories from the start. And yay, I skipped potty training, but what the hell, guys? And also, why isn't there any mana? Because there isn't. Like, at all. The only thing people have is what they're making themselves, but there should be a bunch of it just, suffusing the air and the rocks and the rivers, and all of that's gone. So that puts some major crinks in his plans. He just had all of these things. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and all of a sudden he's got no mana for any of it. It's like, just no budget. All the things I would do if I had all the money in the world, and I plan on being reborn with all that money, but then I was reborn poor.
Oh no.
So that's his problem at first, and the opening chapters are a lot of him struggling with that, trying to save up what he needs to begin the process of regaining all of his old abilities and powers to regrow his access to it, to everything that he needs. And without getting into a lot of spoilers, of course, things go wrong, because it wouldn't be much of a book if it was just straight up to the top again.
That books like that exist. You know it, right? And people
Right,
like it.
they're 100% absolutely, but how do you write more than like 50, 60,000 words when it's just a straight climb up with no hardships and no hurdles? At what point does it become boring because nothing is ever happening other than he wins?
I think what people like, if you write that, I think
Right.
what you do, you write it more like a travel log, right? So, hey, what's the next cool encounter that I can have and overcome really easily? or what are new wonders in the universe that I can see. I can see that being interesting, very relaxing, because nothing is going to go wrong. But totally agree with you. It wouldn't be a book that I would write. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you can do that. And that's kind of more like a slice of life thing, which is a bit hit or miss on Royal Road. If you don't have a lot of conflict, or even if you do have a lot of conflict, but it doesn't feel threatening, like there's no stakes to it, I feel like it gets kind of dull and boring. That's a kind of story that you got a cool premise and then you wrote it, but there's not really much to do after that other than redo it in a new setting. But that's the same story again in a new setting.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to do that. So I had to give him some problems, which is why I made him have no mana, because if he does, then he can just problem solved. Which is actually a challenge, because as he grows, of course, he needs to get access to more of it so he can do better, cooler, bigger things, which means I need bigger, meaner, stronger problems. But that doesn't work because he's not the only one who is completely starved for resources. So that's kind of where I'm at working on book 2 right now, is how do I create challenges? Oh no, things have gotten dark.
Darkness!
It's what you get when you use a computer monitor for your lighting, and it keeps going to screensaver. I should have probably disabled that before we started, but I didn't think to, and it's too late now.
It's fine.
So like I was saying, so that's kind of where I'm at on book 2, where he's got stronger opponents who have more resources by virtue of having had more time to collect and gather and save them. And, then I got to figure out something for book 3 and 4 and see how that all goes.
I mean, like, there's always the point where people give you their ideas, right? And I'll try to not do that because it's your book. But yeah, you'll figure it out.
Oh, I mean, I've got ideas. I just haven't written them down yet. And the thing about ideas is they sound great, and then you write 300,000 words, and you're like, all right, I'm going to use this idea. Wait a second.
Damn it.
If I do that, then I've got to go back and rewrite like 80,000 words in book 2 because it would completely invalidate all that, and it wouldn't work.
See,
crap.
And I just do that. Don't do that. That's bad.
Don't do that.
No.
Don't do that.
I mean, do you plot? Do you? And if yes, to what extent?
Okay, so I used to. And what I discovered was that I could sit down and write a 20,000 word outline for a 100,000 word book, and by chapter 3, I'd have gone completely astray from it, and nothing after that would work anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, if I'm not going to bother to follow them, what's the point of writing them?
Yeah.
So my outlines for the later books are like 3 sentences total, not for each book. 3 sentences total.
One thing that I've found that works is a rolling outline. You write what you still need to write at the end of your current chapter, and you in Scrivener you just split it into a new chapter every time, and that actually kind of works because at the end of the book, most of the lines that you added should have already been removed again, and that's kind of okay. But yeah, it helps with characters suddenly talking about stuff that they have no business talking about and then completely derailing, but it's still a struggle. Right.
I tried Scrivener once, and I'm like, this is a lot of buttons that I don't know what they do or where they're at. So I don't have that function. I just write in plain old Microsoft Word. It works for me. I will say what I've found is if I want to do a lot of work pre-writing, the best place for me to put my efforts into is world building. If I start making characters and magic systems and determining how things work and what the geography looks like, it's a lot easier for me to write a story that takes place there versus if I try to outline what the story is going to be and then end up not following it. So,
are characters part of world building for you?
They are. Not necessarily your protagonist, but if I'm sitting down, for example, I'm sitting down to write book 2, and I'm like, all right, I need the antagonist. I need all of the bad guys who were kind of referenced in book 1 but didn't have an appearance. So, again, I went back to Excel, and I just made a big old spreadsheet that listed out 12 different bad guys and, what they looked like and what kind of special items they had and what their favorite spells were and how they felt about each other and other people in general.
Do they floss on Fridays? Yeah, okay.
And so those characters are part of my world building for book 2.
Cool.
And even then, when it's just a spreadsheet where each character has a couple of lines for their personality that fits into a single cell, like 3 sentences, I still didn't manage to follow it.
That's
Yeah.
kind of okay though, right? For me, the best part about writing is just to see where it takes me. And
Yes.
I can I wish I could be like Travis Baldry, who knows his characters before he even starts to write, which would be amazing, but I don't. I really don't. Like, my characters are wild beasts that do shit that they really shouldn't be doing. So we'll see.
Yes, but that's the fun part. Because the surest way for me personally to lose interest in writing a story is to outline the entire thing and know how it all goes. Well, now I don't need to write it or need to write it. I already wrote the outline,
Mm.
and I get bored with it. So if I know where everything's going, then I get bored and I don't write. So
Yeah.
not a big plotter.
Mm.
Um,
It's, I think,
and
uh, being at that point right now, right? Because a rewrite is basically you have a gigantic outline and you're following that again. I'm not completely rewriting everything, but the joy of exploration gets kind of replaced by this joy of like getting to a destination, right? So like, you know where I'm going, and it's cool. I know where I'm going, but I agree with you. The plotting itself and then kind of just like sticking with that plot the entire time is not very enjoyable to me either. So yeah.
I guess I try to look at it, a rewrite as kind of like you cut out all your puzzle pieces and now you're going to put them together,
Yeah.
which can be fun to, see everything come back together again, only better and smoother with less rough edges. But it's not as fun as making a new puzzle to me.
Yeah, that's true. Very true. I mean, it is still fun, but the anxiety about, taking a piece out of the Jenga tower and then completely collapsing it without even realizing it is there. Definitely is there. So
Yeah. I think that would be a thing I'd be like, it would just be in the back of my head all the time. If I do this, do I invalidate the next 60,000 words that I've already written? Because now it's got to go in a completely different direction. I
yeah.
want to go in this other direction, but then I'm not rewriting anymore. I'm writing a new story.
And then you've written yourself into a corner before you've even written any words at all, and you're like, oh no, I need to change everything. Like, it's fun, but it's also frustrating. But talking about, in general, ideas and processes and tools, what's the best advice you've ever gotten as a writer? Well, it's a new ad. If you're interested in having your story shouted out on this podcast, please reach out to me under critrpg.podcast@gmail.com. For now, I just finished the first book in my own series, Torchbearer. If you like a slow burn story about weak to OP main characters, mixing magic and technology, and numbers going up, you might also enjoy this one. You can find the link to my link tree down below. And that's all for now. Thank you very much for listening and or watching, and let's get on with the show.
So I've gotten tons of advice. To go back to my evil origin story, I lost my job, and I'm like, all right, I've tried posting things on Railroad before, and I got like 50 followers, and that's obviously not enough to do anything, so I want to do it right. And I know that I'm okay with the writing part, but there's so much more to it. So this guy was doing an AMA on, I think it was Our Progression Fantasy. So I sent him a message saying, hey, can I ask you some questions? And then I took up like 6 hours of his life. And he was so nice about it. And I'm going to shout him out when we get to that point. Because, actually, I'm going to shout him out right now. His name is Quill. He writes Firebrand and a couple other things. And I'll shout him out again, and he'll get a double shout out later. And he just, so much advice. Because the thing is, being a successful writer, in part, means selling out to understanding that you're a slave to the algorithm.
Yeah.
It means you need to understand how often you should post and how long your chapters should be, what the optimal numbers for all of these metrics are, and kind of keeping that in mind when you're writing. So I got tons of advice from him about, if you can post, Monday through Friday. If you can post Monday through Sunday, even better. But the more frequently you post, the better off you're going to do. Your optimal chapter length is like 2,000 words. When you set up your Patreon, you want to have 3 tiers, and these are the numbers of chapters each tier should have. Just tons and tons of technical advice, the kind of thing you don't find in books on how to be a writer, because they focus on how to write, not how to do all of the other stuff you have to do when you don't have a publisher who does it for you, which is 99.99% of everybody who posts on Royal Road doesn't have a publisher saying, here's how you do this, here's how you do that. Don't worry, we'll take care of this problem. You just focus on writing. If you're going to be an indie writer, a self-published writer, that's part of the job. So getting advice on how to do all of that was by far the most helpful advice I've ever gotten as a writer.
So the thing is that even if you have a publisher, I mean, you have a publisher now, you still need to publish your own Royal Road stuff. Patreon is not getting done by a publisher either, right?
Yeah, my advice would definitely be to learn how, as much as anyone can, because the guy who does all that stuff on Royal Road is not telling, and he changes it at least semi-regularly. I think if people get too close to figuring it out, he's like, no, out of spite, I'm changing how it works now.
Yeah, kind of is great. I kind of get why he's doing it though, because as
100%.
As big as Royal Road is, both Wing and Kana are still running it like a fan site, which is insane, but also great, I think, because
great
that
for us,
keeps
but insane for them.
If they're okay with it, I'm totally fine with it, right? So I'm not gonna tell them to, sell Royal Road to Amazon. Thank you. No, like it's great. It's great as it is.
Yes, but Kana does put in kind of insane hours keeping it that way. And I don't really speak to Wing much regularly, but I imagine she's probably putting in a lot of work too.
Oh yeah,
definitely way more work than. We're not going to talk about my speakings with John. No, he's fine. I'm kidding.
No, John. Like I talked to John the other last year at some point, and I told him like, this is like Sunday, dude. Why are you responding to tickets on Sunday? He's like, because I really love my job. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. So if the three of them are happy, that's awesome.
Right. Yeah. Totally. And like I said, I'm glad the site works the way it does. But if it were me, I'd be like, we need to hire some help. I want a day off every now and then. That is way more work than 3 people should be handling.
Oh, totally. I think they are hiring a new tech guy. But believe me,
they were talking about it, but I feel like what he said was finding somebody with the qualifications to do it is not easy.
Yeah,
and it's like they need to set aside 6 figures a year to pay that guy's salary easy.
Yeah.
So he's been looking, but I don't know if they found anyone, and I don't know what their bank account looks like anyway, if they can even afford it.
I mean, we'll see. Yeah. Hopefully, right? Because
at some point you just got to trust them and say, you guys know what you're doing. You've been running this site for years. If that's the best course of action for you, that's what you think you should do, then okay. Let me know if there's anything you need me to do to help.
Yeah, exactly. So all of this advice that you've gotten, to go back to the main point before, that's the best advice that you got was to hear about all these, how to publish, when to publish, and which Patreon tiers you get, because you don't get it anywhere else. Is that what you said?
So you can go to a lot of places on the internet and people will talk about, how to write, how to make engaging and interesting characters, how to set up your structure, how to do pacing and plots and all of that stuff. And that advice is everywhere. You'll find that you'll trip over it without even really looking for it if you go to like any sort of writing communities. And I'm not saying that advice is bad. It's good advice, but it's also very common and easy to find. To have somebody sit down and say, here's what you need to do. Here are the nuts and bolts of how Royal Road works. And if you want to be successful, here are the things you need to do, is so much more difficult to come across. Even like a lot of the guides, like I know there's one out there that the guy who writes Defiance of the Fall put out that's very popular. And he's got a lot of good advice like that in there too. But for the most part, people talk about writing. They talk about how to write, not how to be one-person business. Because that's important too. If you just write it and post it, then nobody ever sees it. You got to know how to market it. You got to know how to make the algorithm work for you so that you'll get recommended to other people.
What I found is a bit lacking still is the mindset, right? Because
Yep, that's another thing too. Is I think people,
handling criticism.
yeah, criticism it's kind of different if you have a large following. Like most people go to work, they work for somebody else. Their boss might come by and say, "Hey, we're not happy with this thing. We need to take some steps to correct it."
Mm-hmm.
Remember Office Space, the movie from like the 90s?
I don't, but
Oh, well, you should definitely watch it. It's a fantastic movie about a guy who works a 9 to 5 job, cubicle farm office. But one of his stresses is that he's got so many bosses. And he's in a meeting with the efficiency consultants and in a scene. And he says, and I'll tell you another thing, I've got 8 bosses right now. So that really means every time I make a mistake, I've got 8 different people coming around to tell me about it. So my only real motivation is not to get hassled. It's kind of the same. If I release a chapter and people don't like it, I get bombarded with the same message over and over again complaining about something. And after the 30th or 40th person in 2 hours stops by to let me know they're unhappy with my work, it starts to get to you. So you really have to kind of adjust your mindset because it's not like they're all trying to attack you or criticize you, but there are so many messages that it gets to be overwhelming. I actually had to step away and say, I'm not going to read comments anymore. Keiran has been significantly bigger than my previous books, and it's got a ton more interaction, and that's great, and I love that. But every time something negative comes up, it gets multiplied and explodes and just chips away at you.
yeah,
So
I totally
I
get
had
that.
to just, I just had to say, if you guys want to talk to each other, that's great, but I'm not going to be interacting in the comments anymore.
I think the natural way of that is to slowly move from Royal Road, where there's like a huge audience, to Patreon, and then later on Discord beta reader groups. Right? So just look at the feedback, but
right. Yeah, Patreon it's good, but it's also kind of an echo chamber because those are like your mega fans. Those are the people who love the work you're doing so much, they're giving you money so you can keep doing it. So things that free readers would criticize, they'll gloss right over. Not always, but a lot of the times.
yeah.
They're a lot more forgiving of any flaws in the writing because they like what you're doing so much more that a few minor flaws don't detract from their enjoyment versus other people who are more vocal and less, invested in the story.
And who have perhaps more time to type long ass comments.
Right.
But I agree with you. And maybe the way of, changing that is to find people that don't agree with you, but still read your stuff and voice their complaints in a reasonable fashion, and then put them in the beta reader group too, which is hard.
Finding beta readers is basically impossible. Like I found them. I found people who will like go through and leave typo corrections on every chapter. They'll find them for me, and I say, "Hey, you want a beta read? You can read this story, but like 100 chapters ahead because I keep a huge backlog.
Yeah,
and just do what you're doing now." And they're like, "Yeah, sure, I'll do that." And then they disappear like within a week or two. I've probably gone through a dozen beta readers, and I don't think any of them have lasted more than like 30 or 40 chapters before they just stop. And then a month later, they're back on Royal Road, leaving edit suggestions and stuff again. And I'm like, what happened? Still want to read it on Google Docs, I guess.
I think it's the volume, right? You feel on Royal Road, it's cool because you log in, you do like 10 minutes, and you like do the little edits, and then you click send, and you're done. But if you are looking at an entire book at once, it's overwhelming, I think. Right?
Yes, that's pretty much exactly it. It almost feels like it becomes your job, and now you're obligated to read it and find corrections and typos instead of just enjoying it and pointing out things that you saw. So beta readers, great. I appreciate when people do leave any typo corrections or comments like that, but very, very difficult to find somebody who wants to just do it.
Yeah, totally.
So most of my, like, I go through, I write it, I go through, I edit it myself. And then the Royal Road readers go through and they find all the typos that I missed, and then I have to correct it and do a third pass.
which is, I think, normal. I think most people who actually have the benefit of having beta readers go through and they kind of write it, then edit it the first time, give it to the beta readers, edit it a second time, and then give it to Royal Road and do it a third time. I personally, I just put it on Royal Road, and whenever someone catches something, I go like, "Thank you," and then I correct it both in Royal Road and Scrivener. So, just to know, just so that it sticks. But yeah, I mean, must be nice. No, it's cool.
To be honest, most of my typo corrections come from Royal Road readers too, and I go back to my Word document, my master draft, my manuscript, because that's the thing I'm going to send to the publisher one day, and I correct as much of it as I possibly can before it goes to the publisher. Which book 1 for Keiran is with the publisher right now with an editor, and I've just got a sheet of all the corrections that Royal Road readers have given me since it went to the editor to make sure that those get caught. It's getting kind of long. We're into like our second page of corrections now, so it'll be interesting when it comes back to see how many the editor caught themselves and how many that they missed too. Hopefully they catch all of them.
I recently saw a thread on Facebook where someone said, "Oh, I have to go through all of these edit suggestions from the editor, and that takes like 3 days." I'm like, "What?" Because one of my friends, he also got like one of those edit sheets back, and he went through it, and it took him like 5 days, and then he was like, "I'm done." And he sent it back to the publisher with like, "Hey, I'm done, thank you." And they're like, "Done with what?" And he's like, "I'm done with editing everything." And they just said like,
"Oh
no,
so much work."
Yeah, that's 5 days gone. Because
they don't like that. They want you to answer the questions, not hit accept on everything.
Yep.
Yeah, I lost about 3 or 4 hours of work doing that the first time I sent a manuscript to the publisher and they sent it back. Not 5 days. Because I'm like, all right, what do you want me to do with this now that you've sent it back? But I'd already started. I'm like, accept that, no, decline that, accept that. And they're like, no, don't do any of that. I'm like, okay, throw this file in the garbage, re-download from my email, start over again.
Yeah.
For my lit RPG that Podium has, it's an all-day job to go through just answering the questions. For my first story, which was just regular progression fantasy, there were a lot less questions because there were a lot less numbers for me to screw up. Nothing is worse than like chapter 3. The editor's like, shouldn't this number be 12, not 14? No. Yes, well, I wanted to carry that too for the next 70-some chapters, so this is going to be fun.
Now, I had that too, and I was like, no, that robot just gives like 15 more logic. It just gives 15 more. It's fine.
Yeah, you really just want to go in there and be like, no, he got a +2 from this thing that I'm just adding in right now to make it work.
Yeah. And like you have like this long ass fight scene, and it's beautifully written and prosaic, and there's like flowers around everything. And then at the end, it's just like, oh, and then he also killed another goblin and jumped on him, and it gave him 2 more XP.
Yep. So I learned my lesson writing the God Machine. I will never, ever, ever do a crunchy lit RPG that has an actual experience total that's visible to the readers ever again. No, you will get at best a percentage, and the rules for what that percentage are and how it moves will be undefined.
Yeah, I just got 50,000 experience. Is that good? Is it bad? I don't know. We'll level up at some point.
Yeah.
Oh my god!
On another lit RPG, and I completely scrapped even having an experience system. It's like, no, you get 10 skills, and each skill is leveled 1 through 10, and your level is however many skill levels you have.
I've recently read Book of the Dead, and that was very interesting because I love that system there because it always has a progression. It says like you did this, and like you were a human and connected with other humans, and that means like you gained experience in your human form or human class, which is good, right? But and then he levels up at some point at like arbitrary points where the story requires you to level up, which I think is the best way of handling these kind of things. I don't know. Malice D, I think he still writes very crunchy, right? So sell those.
I read like book 1 and part of book 2 of Salvos, and then I kind of stopped following it, so I'm not sure what he's got going on anymore.
Yeah. No, I mean, probably he does. He was very renowned for it, and he's got a numbers. He's got a
Yes.
thing for
Whatever
a brain
he's
for numbers.
doing, he's doing something right because he's got way more success than I'll probably ever have.
I mean, you're at 4,500. You can rise.
I'm doing all right. And I
Yeah.
mean, basically I'm kind of starting a couple months into year 2 of my writing career, so I can't complain about where I'm at.
Absolutely not. I mean, looking at people I mean, okay, Malice D and Shortloon, for example, or First of Fire and Zogoth are examples that don't exist anymore because back then,
Right.
just content was king. You just put out something regularly for a year and you had 1 billion followers. That doesn't happen anymore. And I think in this day and age where, Rising Stars every month, there's like 10 books, maybe 20 books on Rising Stars. And they all peak at about 3,000 ish followers, right?
Mm.
And then having
And
4,500 while you're still on number one is actually pretty good, I think. Because, yeah,
funny
the numbers
story is
will.
I actually didn't really make it to number 1. Another guy had a story out and he beat me basically the whole time.
I. Wait. No, wait. You had 4,500 and I saw you at number one, definitely.
For about 12 hours, I had number 1, and then he
There
took it
you
back
go.
again.
There you go. No.
Yeah.
I mean,
So like the whole time, I basically like rose up and got to number 2, and then just kind of sat there. And for a couple hours, when he started to drop, I went up to number 1. And the next time I looked, he was back number 1. And I'm like, oh come on, you had your turn. No.
I mean, like I think when I put up Torchbearer,
Yeah.
an author relaunched 5 of his 5,000 follower stories at the same time.
Ouch.
Yeah, no way.
And that's the thing about Rising Stars is it can have really kind of anemic periods where there's not a lot going on. There's not a lot of popular. There's tons of books that are sitting at like 300 to 700 followers, and you can get to number 1 with like 2,000 followers. And then if you try to launch a book right now, good luck because Actus has got something up and that's got 10,000 followers, and Wolfstein has got something up and I think that's at like 4,000 right now.
Oh God.
And like the competition is fierce in January, which is why I launched Keiran in December because originally I was planning on launching it in January. And I'm like, no, this is a bad idea.
Let me just see. Yeah. Rise of the Living Forge right now is at 9,177. Actus does it again. Oh man.
Yeah. So,
Totally.
Nobody who launched anything in January is getting first place because he's got that locked down.
Yeah, totally. And then Wolfshine too. You are completely right. That is insane.
Yeah. But like I said, if you go back to, I think it was October, it was really dead. Like, I think the top book in October only had like 22 or 2,500 followers.
Yeah, October was like super weird because also no one read because they were all on vacation,
Right.
right? So no one was at
and
home
then-
and doing work or reading at work, I should say. It's
Yeah.
you can kind of tell when people are off of work or commuting or on break by the numbers of people on Road. It's really fun.
Yes. So my takeaway from that was my next book is launching in October because there'll be no competition that month.
Okay, so one thing though, competition does float you up too, because
if there's a lot of good stuff, then you're part of it.
it's a psychological thing, right? So it's like, oh wow, this thing has like 9,177 followers, and the next one has like 3,050. So this almost 5-star rated thing at like 2,500 followers right below that must be really good. I'm really interested in that, right? So that's what happens, I think personally. But yeah, probably.
There's that, but then there are also people who like will only look at number 1, maybe number 2, and they're not scrolling down that list, which is why there is a huge jump where like when you go from number 11 to number 10 and you show up on the front page, And then when you go from number 10 to number 7 and you show up on the front page for all people who don't have an account or don't have a premium and are seeing ads, and like your number of followers per day just will like triple immediately just from having the visibility.
I was at number 7 for a short time, and I'm way okay with that. My book cover is actually part of the preview for the iOS app, so I'm good. But
yes. I feel like I remember yours because it was kind of a GIF, wasn't it? It was animated. Yeah, I remember seeing that and going, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Can I do that? Turns out I
Yes, you
couldn't.
can.
No idea how. Couldn't figure it out.
Yeah.
Never thought to actually message you and be like, so how'd you do that?
I can do that. I can tell you that. It's not that hard. But for all the like fancy shenanigans I did, people didn't stick around to read. I do have like good retention, but
I feel like you write sci-fi too, though, don't you?
I write this. Torchbearer is a sci-fi psychological thriller lit RPG. It is not meta at all.
No,
but
not
that being
even
said,
a little bit.
I'm okay with that though. By the way, I'm okay with it not
'cause
being meta because I hit my goal, and my goal was to hit top 10.
mission accomplished.
Yeah, and people who read it to the last, like, who read it, they are very awesome people, and leave great comments. And I, every once in a while, like for you, probably you get this all the time, but I get one person who comments, "Thank you for the chapter," on every single chapter, and I can kind of like track how fast they're reading, which is super interesting. So yeah,
yes, cool. The first time that happened, I woke up and had like 47 notifications on my phone, and I'm like, "What is going on right here?" Because I'm used to, I've been posting on Reddit for years. If I go to Reddit and I have 30 some notifications, that means I said something that pissed a lot of people off. So I'm like, "Oh God, what did I do?" And there's just some guy going, "Thanks for the chapter, thanks for the chapter, thanks for the chapter, thanks for the chapter," and I'm like, "Oh, thank God." And then I turned off email notifications or whatever for comments.
See, what's super sneaky though, at some point, like they do this for like 50 chapters, and then in chapter 27, they actually say something else.
Yes. Once
so
in
you
a
have
while.
to go through everything. But yeah, it's actually, I do try to read my comments. I don't read my comments in the first 20 chapters yet, because I know they are not good. I know they need to be like, okay, I shouldn't be saying this. They're good, but I know I can do better. I know they have some flaws. So I'm not reading the first 20 chapters, because also I feel as though the first 20 chapters, people who don't like the story, they drop off after 20 chapters. They say like, hey, look, like this is not for me. And that's okay. That's cool. But I don't need to read 10 people telling me they don't like my story, which is fair enough. But I still struggle to like keep that distance,
Yes, that's what got me with Keiran, was like, because it was like my previous books were like 2,000, 2,200, 2,400 followers. And then Keiran kind of blew up. And with all those extra people came a lot of people saying, "I don't like this story. This sucks. I don't like this thing. I don't like this choice." And for the most part, I don't delete the comments people leave unless they're like, really vulgar, mean, swearing at you, personal attack kind of comments, which you get occasionally. Those people are pleasant. But, for every one person like that, there's 100 people who are happy and fine with the story and just haven't commented anything. But yeah, you gotta kind of adjust your mindset to the idea that you don't have a boss, you have thousands of people giving you their opinion. And invariably, with a large number of people, are going to be people who are not polite about giving you their opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Who are not happy with it. One of the biggest skills I'm learning, or have learned, is to not take this personally, kind of like let it just wash over you, and then ask like, okay, cool, what's one thing that you would like to improve in here? I mean, you say you don't like it, so tell me more. And then you kind of put all the stuff together and look at what you can really do. Because if it's one person, okay, whatever. But if it's like 10, 20, 30, you need to listen, because they're giving you feedback that you can use to improve your story. But it's definitely not easy, because taking, like as I said before, right? There's not really that many books that talk about the mindset of writing. There's this really old book by Dorothea Brandy, but she was literally a fascist. Like, she was a self-proclaimed fascist in the 1930s. And it's like, I'm very hard to recommend that book for that reason, but it is a good guide, I guess. But someone needs to redo it at some point. Maybe I will.
Yeah.
But to get to the point,
it could be a bestseller.
yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about calling it "Feeling All Right" with a W, or "The Right Feeling." I'm not quite sure. There needs to be a pun in there, obviously.
Well, puns catch people's eyes for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Good titles will draw in a lot of people. That's why I hate Mother of Learning for having just the perfect title for a time loop story. Nobody's ever going to beat that.
I never got that it was a pun.
Repetition is the mother of learning.
I have never heard the idiom outside of that book.
Okay, well, it's an old saying, and yeah, perfect for a time loop.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love the story, but I hate him a little bit for setting the standard so high because nobody's ever going to match that.
I mean, there's some really cool ones, but I got what you mean. Yeah. Okay. But we talked about your book. We talked about the best advice you've ever gotten as a writer. But you mentioned something earlier in the podcast, like about 45 minutes ago, which I'm sure you remember. That was about.
100%. I definitely don't have to write things down to remember them.
Me neither. It says here. No, you made some mistakes, you said, in the first book, and then that you redeemed in Keiran. Do you want to talk more about that a little bit more? Because this is the part where we talk about fixing your own mistakes and what you've learned from writing.
Sure. So when I say I made some mistakes, I mostly mean that I did not know my audience well enough.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that I think this was a bad book and I need to rewrite it because I totally screwed up this thing. Just that when I first started writing it, I had never had a large following, so I didn't have anybody complaining about things they didn't like. Mm-hmm. So one thing I learned is that Royal Road does not want to read about mental illnesses. We don't want to talk about PTSD. We don't want to talk about panic attacks. We don't want to talk about any of that. Some people are fine with it, but the majority are like, no, get that crap out of here. I don't want to read about how he's, struggling with that. So, you know how there's a million isekai lit RPGs where they get pulled into this world and they immediately start slaughtering things like the murder hobos they were in D&D. Mm-hmm. And nobody ever gets PTSD. Nobody ever. Is concerned about the fact that they just took a human life or that they're fighting for their life or that one mistake could be the end of their life. They just accept it and move on. And it's not realistic at all. Yeah. But nobody wants to read that 20 chapters where they struggle and come to terms with their new violent lifestyle. So stories that do well aren't going to have that because most people don't want to see it. So it's a lot of stuff like that.
As a quick aside, I just sunk into my chair because...
Right, saw that.
Well, Torchbearer is a story about PTSD.
Yes.
First and foremost. And
so that's different, though.
Yeah, 1 second, because I would love to hear that. But what was funny about it, when you mentioned earlier that your main character got reincarnated and there was no mana anywhere.
Right.
In Torchbearer is the exact opposite way. She got reincarnated and she had this power, and suddenly the power is everywhere. So super interesting, super funny, but that was just as an aside. You were going to say, though, about PTSD stories.
Right. So when I say that, a story about mental illnesses that focuses on it is different than a story where it's adventure and action and fantasy. And also mental illnesses. Mm-hmm. Because it would be realistic for somebody to be kind of messed up having to go through that kind of stuff and have some trauma from it. Mm-hmm. They don't want a story that's not about that to include that. And I mean, I'm sure there's going to be somebody in the comments going, but I love stories like that. But those people are very much in the minority. Yeah. Which brings me to my next point. Don't go to threads on Reddit that are titled things like, what are things that you hate about progression fantasy, or what are your big pet peeves, and look for inspiration in there, because that is a very small vocal minority complaining about very popular tropes that are popular for a reason.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Most people like they just read stuff and then they're cool with it. I think all of progression fantasy is very, very much escapism, and I think Benjamin Carré does the best version of this, where his books are about loss and grief, but they are all packaged in a very fun way, right? Oh, great! I was reincarnated as a farmer. The entire first three books, or first two books, I should say, are just about this guy doing whatever, but coming to terms with the fact that he's never going to find his family again, right? Or see his family again. And I think that's awesome because it's done in such a way that's fun, it's intriguing, numbers are going up, there's dopamine rushes, but you still get these moments of like, yeah, actually, this is a little bit sad. So, yeah. But as I said, it's escapism, and that's not a bad thing because everyone will tell you, like all the authors I've interviewed, people need that right now.
A little bit, yeah. It's been a trying couple of years. We've had a lot going on.
Yeah, that's very true.
But yeah,
what gets bad gets better.
Hopefully.
Yes.
And until then, there's Royal Road. And you can read all sorts of stuff where things aren't quite so bad, or they're bad in different unfamiliar ways that you can't sympathize with, so it's okay.
Or they're bad, but the person you empathize with most in the book has the power to change them, right? And that's also cool.
That's a big thing, is the characters have to have agency. They at least your main character, if nobody else, has to be able to have the tools and the knowledge, the power to affect a change in a positive way. Characters that just kind of get dragged along by the story, that are more victims of the plot rather than the heroes of it, don't tend to do as well on Royal Road.
Yep, 100% underlined. Like, I also think that's something that most people who come into this podcast talk about. Agency is critical. I've just started reading Kill 6 Billion Demons, which is not a robot novel. It's a web cartoon. It is insanely good, but it's confusing as hell. And through the first 3 chapters, which is, I think, 50 pages of comic, the main character literally gets dragged along, like literally. And they make it work somehow. I have no idea how, but they make it work. It's really good.
Right. But I'm assuming after that he starts taking control of his own life again, and then you get to see him rising. Her rising back up from the lows at the beginning of the story.
Yeah, there's quite literally a moment where she asks herself, like, "Hey, who am I actually? So, am I a kind of person who runs away from these things?" And she used to be, but she has the Sword of Want, and so I shouldn't spoil. It's really good. It's arcane and eldritch, but it's very, very good.
That sounds interesting. I'm gonna go look it up and see how much I can read for free.
I think it's like 10 chapters. Like it's been running for ages, but yeah. I mean, it's one of the books that I would love to be able to write, because the world is completely batshit insane. There's references to at least 15 different faiths that I have counted, and everything has metaphorical meaning. It's great, but I can also see why that's not something that most people would enjoy. So we'll see.
Well, that's the great thing about books, is there's so many that even if you don't like the one you're reading, you can always find another one.
Exactly. The chances of you running out of books that you like are 0. Like, there's always going to be more books. Yep. You just have to find them.
Basically. Now, they might not be free. Great thing about Royal Road, low barrier to entry to find a huge catalog of things to read, because so much is free.
Yeah. And it fosters this like community of people like, hey, I've read this. Can you recommend that? And yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yep.
Okay, so
works. Sorry, go ahead. And they
Yeah,
say Kindle
you
Unlimited
said
works the same way, which is a slightly more expensive barrier of entry.
yeah.
You give them $10 or 12 or whatever it's up to now,
Mm.
and you've got billions of words to read. You'll find something you like in there.
Yeah, and so to get back to the point we were making earlier,
Right.
your big takeaway from writing and learning was to not necessarily go against the meta just for the sake of it.
Yes, that's pretty accurate.
Okay.
I think that was part of my problem with my second book was that I did go into threads on Reddit that said, "What are your pet peeves?" and thought I could write a book that explains that. I could,
Mm-hmm.
justify that in the plot,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't unpopular, but I think it would have been a better story if I hadn't taken any inspiration from what tropes are you tired of seeing.
I don't like this is not about you, all right? So, but I still want to say this because it's important to me, and that is, I would recommend against any shape or way or form of letting other people dictate what kind of book you want to write, right? So, yes, Royal Road is a great place for progression fantasy that is male focused. Numbers go up, escapism, lots of agency. That doesn't mean that your book, just because it isn't good on Royal Road, is not a good book or that it won't sell or whatever, right?
Right.
You just have to find your audience. There's also Wattpad. There is Scribble Hub. There's some other pages that are really huge. People are still posting stuff on like DeviantArt, right? DeviantArt has a literary community. So
Oh, that's news to
yeah,
me.
right. Yeah, you just need to find your place,
Right.
and collect people that like your story. And if there's like mechanically something wrong with it, people will let you know, and then you have to listen and
Right.
fix it. But the rest is just taste.
Yes. Yep. I will say that you shouldn't let other people dictate how you write your story, but at the same time, you should also keep in mind who your audience is.
Yeah.
If I'm trying to write a story that I want to publish on Royal Road, yes, I've got a list of half a dozen topics that I'm just going to avoid. I feel okay making those compromises and not writing about those things because I know that it will cause pushback from my audience.
And I think that's where we differ. Maybe I'm just not as mature as you are yet, but I wouldn't do that. I will write what I want to write, and I think my books are better for it because
Right. Well, I'm still writing what I want to write,
mm,
but it's like if you come to a fork in the road and you can go to A
mm,
or you can go to B,
mm.
but you know that going to B is going to make people mad, and they're both going to lead to the same spot in the end anyway.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I'm okay with just going to A.
Oh, that's very true. Yeah, I can see where you're coming from, definitely. So, not going out of your way in a way to
Right.
do something new for the sake of newness. Completely agree with you. But for example, I could have written Torchbearer as a male protagonist because that was a choice at the beginning, and I didn't. Right? Because I just don't want to write it.
That's not something I care about. There's going to be people who don't like having a female main character, and that's fine. Just don't read it if I write a story that has a female main character. It doesn't bother me at all.
But that would be what you said, right? You are going to lose, I think it's about 20% of potential readership.
Right.
Just because you're writing female MC or you're writing sci-fi. I mean, I don't write sci-fi, but people still.
I don't want to write sci-fi. I considered it, but those people who will like pick apart your numbers in lit RPGs, they are way more prevalent in sci-fi, and I don't want to deal with that. Like those people are like, that's not how a hard light fusion drive reactor would work, and I'm like, what the hell's a hard light fusion drive reactor? What does it have to do with what I wrote?
What do you mean? What's a boson? What?
No, I'm not into the science stuff. I can just wave my hand and be like, magic.
And this is why science fantasy is amazing. You can make tech look great and then literally write, at one point, we all thought that the magic was all that held the technology together. Period. Like, that's it.
Yes.
It's the exact explanation.
But that doesn't satisfy some people because they want hard sci-fi that is like grounded in realistic principles of the universe. And I'm like, I don't know what those principles are, so go look somewhere else.
I mean, like, remember that time when Star Wars tried to appeal to hard sci-fi fans?
No.
where they explained, the Jedis exist because of these like weird bacteria. I have no idea what they will call them, chloridians, meridians, whatever, right? And
Midichlorians,
yeah,
I think.
thank you.
I'm actually not a Star Wars fan, but
Me
that
neither.
was referenced in Parks and Rec in one episode, so I remember it.
But right, so don't mix that, right? So like if you want to write fantasy in space, write fantasy in space. If you want to write, again, we're back to the don't appeal to people who are not your audience. I think that's a very good point.
Don't try to appease people who aren't your audience, is how I want to say that.
Yeah, that's very good.
But yeah, I feel like I have a much better grasp on my audience on Royal Road now than I did a year ago. And it's kind of like writing to a prompt, but in reverse. Instead of saying I need to make a story out of this prompt they've given me, it's I need to make a story while avoiding these 4 things.
Okay.
And then inside that constraints, I have all the creative freedom I could ever want. And because there are, 1,000 ways something could go, it works for me.
There's this joke on the author community that I'm in, where I am writing Royal Road on hard mode, and then I talked to them about this new idea that I had that I was writing and that I actually wrote. Won't spoil here, but they were like, "No, you're not writing on hard mode anymore. This is hell mode. Like you are literally in hell mode. Like this is what are you doing?" But story's still kicked off, and like I said at the start, like tie a nice bow around it. I'm not writing for the money. I'm writing to see, hey, can I trick people who actually might not think they would like this to actually like this? Can I put kale in this smoothie and make people like it still? Because it's fun to me. It's fun to pay people to offer people something that might broaden their horizons and might make them think. But I don't know. I like the challenge. Speaking of challenges,
sure.
Because we need to look at the time.
Right.
What's one book that you love and why is it awesome?
One book that I love and why is it awesome? Well, I read a ton of books, and most of them aren't online. I have a rather huge collection of paperbacks and hardcovers, but let's exclude all of those because I'm a web serial author and talk about just web serials for now, so I can cut this down a little bit. If I had to pick my favorite web series of all time, I'm going to narrow it down to either Worm or Mother of Learning. And I think I'm going to go with Mother of Learning because as much as I liked Worm, I definitely preferred the pre-time skip section of the story to the post-time skip section. And also because I'm a sucker for magic schools. And after reading Mother of Learning, I'm like, time loops are also pretty cool because he did such a good job on that. So I'm going to say Mother of Learning just kind of hit a lot of the right notes for me. I liked the setting. I liked the ideas. It just worked. And I recently learned that apparently the guy who wrote it is English as a second language.
Yep. I think he's Ukrainian, Russian.
I'm not sure. I just know that I would not have guessed it from reading Mother of Learning. There were a couple things where I'm like, that's kind of a weird way to say it, but I mean...
Have you read Perfect Run?
What's that?
Perfect Run?
Perfect Run? I read the first book. That's also pretty good. I haven't read any of the other ones. One day when I get Kindle Unlimited, I will, but not yet.
It's not on KU. It's because it's free on the entire thing is free on Railroad, so it can't be on KU. Maxime said that he won't put it on KU either.
I thought there were additional volumes after the first one.
They are, but they're all on Railroad.
Huh. Okay, well, I know what I'm doing this weekend then. This is news to me. I thought that there were 4 volumes of it, and only the first one was on Royal Road, and the other ones were all on Kindle Unlimited.
No, there's 3 volumes, and they're all on.
Are they 3 separate entries and not just one fiction number? Maybe.
Let me check this.
Is Royal Road back up yet? I guess is what I should be asking right now. Can I go look for myself?
It is, and it's like Mother of Learning, Perfect Run, and Journey of Black and Red. Journey of Black and Red, by the way, it's good.
Yes.
Like, it's super weird. It's best completed, and it's a non-progression fantasy, female MC, 17th century Southern American vampire story. Like,
Right.
and I talked to
But
Mechanimus, and I asked him like, "How are you doing?" He's like, "I don't know if my writing is good." I'm like,
yeah. Well, one thing you got to look at too is a lot of those stories they started 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. So the audience they had and the things they had to overcome in the competition is not the same as people writing those kind of stories today. But
but they're
once you
still
get
being
cemented
rated.
up in the top of the list, you kind of have a tendency to stay there because you've got perpetual algorithm support pushing your content, and writing is kind of a numbers game. You know, better to have
Yeah,
10,000 happy people and 1,000 unhappy than 2,000 happy and no unhappy.
I mean, but wouldn't the top one attract a lot of people who want to read it and then who don't like it and then 0.5 star it?
Like I said, numbers game. If 20% of the people who don't read it, or 20% of people who read your story don't like it, and you only have 1,000 people who read it, then 200 people didn't like it. But if you have 10,000 who read it, that's still 8,000 people more who liked it than who didn't. If you have a bigger audience.
I mean, so looking at, oh no, Magical Girl Gunslingers off of hiatus. Oh no, my poor trauma response. What?
Yeah. No,
Sorry,
Magical Girl Guns. Oh my! I can't talk anymore.
MGG.
We're gonna edit that part out.
We're gonna edit the entire
Magical
part
Girl
out where we're talking about
Gunslinger.
this. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like the last update she just said she was going on hiatus to write something else, and I'm assuming the author is a woman, and I don't actually know that.
Mikasane, probably.
Well, I mean, I
17
assumed Ravensdagger was a woman until I started talking to him, so
Yeah, I also thought that. And I assumed Honor Ray was a man, so I don't know anything. So,
yeah, can't make that
but
assumption. Not on the
yeah,
internet.
24 days ago. Cool. All right. But
Okay.
yeah, so with that entire bracket being edited out,
Excellent.
excellent, yes. I know how to spend my time well. I don't have any issues with going down rabbit holes in my prose. What are you talking about? Right. So you picked your book, which was Mother of Learning,
Yes.
and it's a very good pick. Anything in particular that you would say like completely sticks out for you that you would highlight for other people to emulate or that you want to emulate?
From Mother of Learning specifically, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
It was incredibly consistent with all of the background details that didn't seem important when you first encountered them, only to be explored later on in loops. I cannot even imagine how much work he put into that. And in trying to write my own time loop magic school story, that was the biggest hurdle I encountered, was keeping things consistent in the background, because no, it doesn't matter what those people are doing right now, but it might in 30 chapters when the protagonist repeats this scene for the 20th time, but now she's going in a different direction. Because, yes, I had a female lead in my time loop magic school story.
Did you publish that?
Nope, I've got about 5 chapters written, and like one diehard fan who's like, have you written any more of that yet? Ready to go public with that so I can read it? And I'm like, no, still working on it.
All right. Well, I think we're already just sliding into the shout-out territory. Do you want to do some shout-outs? I mean,
Sure.
I why do you want to shout out Quill, and who do you want to shout out?
Right. Well, like I said earlier, I'm going to shout out Quill because Quill is the man who gave me like all the good advice on the nuts and bolts of being an author, specifically on Royal Road, not just a guy writing a story, but how to succeed on the platform that I'm on. So, like I said, I'm going to shout out him. He's writing Firebrand right now. It really doesn't give it as much love as it deserves. I think it's a really good story, but it could use a bigger following than it has. So go check that out.
Yeah.
Let's see, next on my shout out list, I want to shout out Ravensdagger. I already talked about him. He is kind of like an awesome, amazing person. I don't know how he manages to like maintain his public composure and persona so well. But like, people were like, "What would Jesus do?" I'm like, "What would Ravensdagger do?" Get into a situation where I'm like, I'm getting upset about something, I'm getting irate. How would Ravensdagger answer this question? What would he say?
Yeah.
I don't always follow it, but like the man is just an inspiration for being a wholesome, good person. And, also he's a workaholic who's released like 20 books and is constantly writing like 6 books at once.
6 books at once.
Like, for example, he's got a new one out right now. It's on Rising Stars. I think it's at number 6 or 7. Yeah. That the marketing is not great on that one because it kind of sounds like a rom-com, but it's actually like Warhammer 40K fanfic. So it's really good, but it's really not what you'd expect by the title. But that's okay because one thing he told me when we were talking months ago was the philosophy of one for you, one for me. Write a story just for yourself, what you want to write without any concern for what anybody else might care about, and then write the story that is for your audience, and then write another one for yourself and one for your audience. That way you can still do anything you ever want and also pay your bills at the same time.
If you can write 6 stories at once. Yes, Ravensdagger. That is very true.
Yes, you do have to. You do have to be able to multitask. But even if you can't, you can still write them one at a time. I do have 2 other shout-outs I want to do before we get away from that territory.
Wait. No, actually, don't wait. Like, cut this entire part. Like, cut my saying wait else, please. Yes, 2 more shout-outs.
Okay, so Unstoppable Juggernaut, guy who writes Mark of the Fool. Also just an awesome guy, super friendly, super helpful. And Semantis, the guy who writes Path of Ascension, same deal. Super helpful, super friendly. They're way bigger than I'll ever be, but they still will just, chat. What's up? How's it going? Be friends with me. And they didn't have to. I was just some no-name author who pestered them for some help. And then the friendship kind of developed from there. So guy who writes Mark of the Fool, guy who writes Path of Ascension, also awesome books. If you haven't checked them out, which who hasn't by now? But if you haven't, you should.
I think Path of Ascension is still very much a secret tip. It's a cultivation story in space, but you don't notice space a lot. It's really good.
It's more into the space now that they've gotten stronger, but the early ones is. I think he described it as a lit RPG car with a cultivation engine or something like that.
Yeah,
I can't remember the exact description, but I'm like, that's pretty accurate.
Pretty accurate, yeah.
So that's my shout out list of people who have helped me, have inspired me, who are just general all around awesome people that I'm really happy to have as part of my life.
Yeah, nothing to add to that. Cool. Well, with that being said, I think it is past time for us to end the official part of the main podcast that is on YouTube, and we are going to continue talking after a quick break. And you can find that, if you listen to this, on Patreon. I would love to have you. You can find the link to my Patreon down below this episode. And if you're, I think even if you're on, oh God, I added this so hard. Yeah, I think even if you're on Spotify, you can still find everything down below. If not, it's linktr.ee/maddox3, no dash, and cool. I hope we can see you there. And you, Emergency Complaints, and we're going to have words.
Oh.
Any last words?
Words were bad. No, I think I feel like I've accomplished all of my goals on this podcast. Subscribe to his Patreon because there's probably some good stuff, but if I tell you what it is, then you wouldn't go there and pay for it.
You can listen to more of Emergency Complaints and myself after the break. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week.